Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we've got intricate scrolling with spiral blades. Again. Well, last week's show was a little bit of a disaster with a couple of failed projects due to poorly chosen stock. But we finally got that corrected by the end of the show and we're able to move on with the cutting. And that's what we're going to do this week. But hopefully you were still able to take something positive away from last week's show. So without further ado, let's get into the cutting and some of the tips that I'll give you for how to cut a project that is as intricate as what this cutting is. Well, in starting with today's cutting, we're not going to bother with the basics where we did last week with the adhesive and how to apply it and that sort of thing. But we will start with something very, very basic. And what that is blade insertion. Guys, these blades are extremely fragile, so you need to do everything in your power to lessen their damage because they do get damaged very easily. So the first thing that you want to do before you ever take your piece to the saw, after drilling your blade entry holes, gently sand the back. Now you can use a quarter sheet sander with some 220 grit sandpaper. You should already have that set up for each one of your hour-long sessions. After your hour, you sand that one section that you just did. But sand the back of your piece after drilling. Now what this does is it takes away any of the blowout and opens those holes completely. As you're running the piece around on the scroll saw table, that back gets burnished just a little bit. And if there's any of those burrs or blowout from the blade entry holes, it will seal them back over. And now you're using your blade to puncture down through those again. And while it may not seem like a big deal, these blades are fragile and it's a very, very easy way to kink your blade. Now, speaking of kinking blades, a bent blade is still very usable, extremely usable. They're going to get bent. That's just the nature of them. They're very soft, they're very fragile, they're very pliable. They do not have a spine like a normal scroll saw blade. So they will get bent, and that's quite okay. They are still fully usable, but if your blade gets kinked, get rid of it. While you can still use it, that kinked blade is extremely susceptible to breakage and it will break very quickly. The problem with that, it's not the blade breaking. Blades break all the time. But if the pieces of that blade now start hitting into some of your fragile cutting, it's very possible that it could break and snap out some of your cut pieces. And it's very important to protect them at all costs. So how do you insert your blade? Well, for starters, to try to minimize any amount of bending or kinking, you want to support your scroll saw blade. And for that reason, guys, I suggest that for a cut as intricate as this, a top feeding blade is always best. While you can do it with a bottom feeding blade, you will end up going through way more blades on a project like this. So a top feeding blade is preferred. So you want to support the arm of the scroll saw so that the blade is able to stay relatively straight. And then using your finger of the opposite hand, you want to guide it into your blade entry hole and gently feed it down while lowering your arm. Once you get it through the piece and through the blade hole of your tabletop, you can reach underneath and gently guide it through. You have to remember, these are very tiny holes, not much bigger than the diameter of the blade itself. So it's going to need some help. If you just lower the arm, you're going to bend the blade, you're going to kink it, and it will be trash. So gently guide it from underneath while lowering your arm. Then you can apply your tension to the blade. But guys, hold down your piece and then gently start the saw, because if that hole is not drilled perfectly square to your stock, say if you used a pin vise to drill it, that blade is going to bind and it's going to grab. So you need to hold your piece down while you start the saw in order for the blade to straighten out the hole. Well, at this point, we can look at our piece and see where we're at after 2 hours of cutting. Again, I will say, guys, a slow process, but we will carry on. Now, one piece of advice I'd like to give here is pay attention to what your wood is telling you. And what I mean by that is, if at any point in time you see the surrounding areas from where you're cutting, if those pieces start to jiggle or have any kind of movement, that is your wood telling you something. That is your wood warning you that it is about to break. You need to do something about this. And for starters, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to get your fingers on that wiggling part and support it as much as you can by holding it still and prevent it from vibrating. That vibrating will snap along the grain lines in very short order. As well, you want to ease up on your cutting pressure. In other words, on the amount that you're pushing the stock into the blade. At this point, you want to get the blade to just nibble away the stock, and that will give you a very light cut and will reduce the amount of stress that you're placing on the wood. The more material you take away, the more cuts you make, the more susceptible this thing is to breaking and the more fragile it is. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of vibration to destroy a piece. So minimize that vibration by holding on to any vibrating pieces. Guys, as well, something that you want to keep in mind while cutting. I said this in the video in the first part, but never really got much of a practical shot of it. And what that is learning to nibble away at your stock. Normally with regular scroll saw blades, we just push the stock into the blade and spin it to get our cuts. This is different. You're almost filing the wood away. It is not a clean little pretty line or veining line like what a regular scroll saw blade does. So if you have thinner parts or areas where it is not able to cut on the full width of that spiral blade, you need to establish a perimeter along the one edge and then gently nibble the other side to bring it up to the line on the opposite side of the blade kerf. Guys, it's no different than cutting outside the line when scrolling and then using a sander, except in this case we are using the spiral blade almost like a mini file to take that cut down and to finish it off on the pattern as we're cutting it. All right, so when it comes to a cutting like this, you've really got to pack your patience, guys. This little bit of cutting, not even the size of my fist, a little smaller than my fist, 4 hours. This is 4 hours sitting at the saw, and we have a collection of broken blades. So a couple pieces of advice. Number one, these blades are manufactured in such a way that they're straight. They're 100% straight, and then all the teeth are put on them, and then the blades are twisted and cut. It's kind of an interesting process. They're not all equal. So on some of them, what can happen is you may have a hard time getting the blade into the lower blade retainer. If that's the case because the blade just doesn't line up from the twisting or whatever, you can try to correct it by twisting the blade manually with a pair of needle nose pliers. Sometimes that helps, but in general, guys, just get rid of the blade. They're like welding rods. They are a consumable, and for a project like this, you are going to go through plenty of them. So do not let a blade give you frustration. It will cause you more problems than what it is worth. The other thing that I will say about the sanding, as I've told you, sand at each hour interval. cut for an hour or take a break. If an hour is too long for you, cut for half an hour and take a break. It's all about keeping your spine intact. And I'm going to tell you that as you're working on this and hunching over to see better, you will hunch more and more and more and more, and eventually it becomes unbearable. So take breaks, guys. Take breaks on this. Very important. I like to do an hour and then take a break. But for the sanding, I like to sand at each hour. But I'm going to tell you, this project has not lent itself to this method so far. But if you are cutting a scroll saw cutting that has a lot of interior cuts, save your larger pieces. And guys, before you sand, put all those pieces back in the places that you took them out of. And the reason for that is that it will support some fragile pieces like these little outcroppings here and keep them from vibrating, because that vibration will snap them at the grain line. So you really want to keep those pieces if you can. As I said, these pieces here are too small. This does not lend itself very well to that method, but keep your offcuts, put them back in place like a puzzle, and sand with those in place. It will help a lot with the support. Anyway, so this is hour number 4. Let's get into hour number 5 and get that one done as well. Guys, it's the same method. Carefully feeding in the blade into all of the blade entry holes, carefully cutting and nibbling away at each one of these interior cuts. This is something that it's not for everybody, but the final results will be worth it, I promise you. So we're going to keep going on this method here. Keep cutting. Guys, try to cut with as much support as you can. In other words, don't cut all the way up around a perimeter that has little small interior cuts on the inside. It will be too fragile. Cut those interior cuts first and then cut the exterior cut around the outside. That will allow all of it to still have the support of the entire board instead of just being floating on its own while you're trying to cut these small interior cuts. So there you go. We're going to carry on, and I'll show you what this is like at the end of hour 5. And with that, we have 5 hours of cutting in on this project. Now guys, this is what ends up happening to blades when you can't find the hole properly to feed your blade through your piece. And it's not necessarily the holes in your stock. It's this hole right here. It's the clearance insert here, or the blade hole of your work table itself. With a piece this large, it's difficult to know how to line this up. And if you're using a magnifier, that can even further distort your vision and make it so that you can't see. So what can you do about that? Well, I'm going to show you here. This is a great beginner trick. Even if you're experienced, this can help you out immensely. And guys, all this is a laser level, a cheap laser level on a small little tripod. I have it right up here on my Rikon drill press table, and it fires down at my scroll saw, and the crosshairs in the middle match up exactly with the center of my blade hole. So guys, if you can see the blade entry hole on your stock, all you really need to do is line up that laser level with the hole in your stock, and you know immediately that your blade is now going to feed right down through the table with no issues. This will prevent a lot of accidental kinking. So there is just a little bit of a tip if you're new to this kind of cutting, or new to doing cuttings with a lot of interior cut like fretwork. A cheap laser level can help you save some of your blades by aligning this center hole for you when you can't see it, when you're working blind because your piece is covering up the hole in your table. Okay, and with that, all the cutting is done. Pretty amazing, eh? But it does take time, and it is very fragile. So what about your pattern. How are you going to remove this now without damaging your very fragile cutting? Guys, I'm going to tell you, you have several options here. First of all, I'm going to tell you the option that I'm going to choose. And in this case, it is to leave the pattern intact. I am not going to remove this pattern. In fact, I'm going to leave it on and place it to the back of the cutting. What that will do is it will really help to strengthen this. And should this ever get dropped, it will be framed and put behind glass, but should it ever get dropped, the paper will help to give it a little extra support and keep this pattern intact. But if you want to remove it, you can remove it. And let me show you how to do that. So I'm just going to demonstrate it with one of our failed cuttings. And all you need is a heat gun. Guys, you can use a hair dryer, but it would have to have a pretty warm setting to be able to remove it cleanly. So put the heat gun on the highest setting that you can and keep it moving. If you do not keep it moving, it will burn your piece. And you want to heat it up, and once you get an edge lifted, the pattern will be able to be heated. The glue will heat, it will soften, and you can very easily peel this pattern off without damaging your cutting. Now you can see here where I left it on for too long, and it actually did burn some of my cutting. So that is something you want to keep in mind. You want to keep it moving to prevent the burning. However, this leaves a very sticky residue. Now guys, what I would suggest for that is using an acid brush with some paint thinner, and you can very easily and gently clean it up to remove all of your adhesive. Once you get that done, you can sand it, but I'm gonna warn you, do not sand it for at least a day or more after you've applied your paint thinner to this to remove the glue, because if you do, that paint thinner that will be soaked into the grain of the wood is going to mix with the sawdust, and it is going to form a crusty paste that is going to fill in all of your cuttings, and I can promise you it is a nightmare to clean up. Ask me how I know. That is experience talking. So be very careful with that, and do not sand it until all of that paint thinner is 100% completely dry. And there you have it. Intricate scroll saw cuttings with spiral blades. Guys, this project took a lot longer than what I ever thought it was going to, mostly because of the first failed attempts, both the MDF or the hardboard and as well the oak plywood. Both of those failed miserably, and it was my own fault because I didn't stick to what I knew worked, which was solid stock. And even then I had to go and laminate 2 pieces of maple together, and hopefully it was going to work, and luckily it did, and it worked great. The finished product looks amazing. So all in all, how long did this take? Guys, this is an 18-hour cutting. That does not include the drilling of the blade entry holes. That does not include sanding. That does not include prepping the stock. That does not include applying the pattern, etc., etc. That is just sitting at the scroll saw. That is 18 hours sitting there cutting and doing nothing more. It's actually a little more than that. I think it was closer to 18 and a half hours by the time it was done, because there was some times that I went a little beyond the 1 hour timer that I would set, and as well at the end there was like extra time that I went over and above that 1 hour timer because I knew I just had a few cuts left to finish the piece. So you're probably more realistically looking at about 18 and a half plus hours. Now that time was sped up. Why was that time sped up? It's because of the crosshairs of that laser level. That does 2 things. It speeds up your cutting because you're not fussing around and fighting that blade entry hole in both your piece and in your work table. It allows you to line it up perfectly every single time, and that speeds up your process because there's no fighting there. So that's the first thing that does. The second thing that that does is it saves on your blades. Now, don't kid yourself. You're going to go through blades on this project. You are going to break, snap, kink, bend, destroy blades. That's the way that this project works. It's the nature of this style of cutting and the nature of these very fragile blades. You cannot avoid that. That's just the way it is. But you will reduce the number of blades that you break by having this ability to find that hole, that blade entry hole on your table every single time perfectly. It will kink a lot less blades, and therefore it will break a lot less blades. So when you're aligning that, remember, there's going to be two alignments. I didn't tell you this initially, but there's going to be two alignments of that laser level. The first thing is you're going to adjust it so that it fires into the center of the hole of your table. That's great. That works wonderfully. However, as soon as you add the thickness of your stock, in this case, I think it's 1/4 inch, as soon as you add that, that changes the trajectory of your laser level and it changes the positioning of it. So what you're going to want to do is after you get your blade through your first blade entry hole and you tension it, that will give you the exact center of that hole and where your blade seats comfortably. Then once you get that, you want to readjust your laser, and from there you can leave it. Now you're set. Don't just leave it at your initial setting at the table, because it will put you off just a little bit. And that little bit off could be enough to misalign you enough that you will kink a blade and break more often. So remember to realign that the second time. You don't need the laser level, guys, but it is a good tip to be able to get a much better and successful cutting quicker and save on blades. Another thing that you want to remember is that spiral blades are a different animal. You're not so much cutting the stock as you would with a skip tooth blade, we'll say, or a crown tooth, or whichever type of blade you're using. You're not so much cutting the stock as you are nibbling away at it in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, you're running it through and sure, it's cutting, but it's quite the wide kerf. And then you're coming back around the back end of the cut and you're kind of filing or nibbling along the edge of that cut to finish it off and clean it up and get the full size or shape that you want. A lot of these cuts, guys, are tiny, tiny, tiny. They're smaller than the end of a pencil eraser. In a lot of cases, they're not much bigger than the diameter of the blade itself. So that's going to bring me to my next point, and that will be magnifiers. Guys, you have no idea how a magnifier will increase your scrolling ability. It will increase your confidence. It will increase your ability to follow the pattern because you can much more easily see what is happening. The one thing you want to remember is your eyes are kind of funny. They're going to try to focus in on the glass of that magnifier. That's just the nature of it. You want to sort of train yourself to look beyond that and focus on the actual cutting itself. And if you wear glasses like what I do, in my case trifocals, that can take a little bit of getting used to, but stick with it. I promise you it'll be worth it. The other thing that you want to remember or that you want to do, the best tip I can give, and this goes for scrolling across the board, not just something as intricate as this, but you need to train yourself to tighten and tension those blades under the table without looking. Too many guys are getting down there trying to see underneath the table, struggling with it. You need to be able to do it by touch and feel and muscle memory. That is going to speed things up. That is going to help you immensely in your scrolling. And that is something that you should be trying to learn from day one. Even though it will slow you down at first, get used to the idea of changing those blades and attaching them in your lower blade retainer without the use of your eyes, without having to look at it. You want to be able to feel it, get the feeling of knowing when it goes into that retainer, get the feeling of how that set screw feels when you tighten it so that you know you've got it right. It's going to take longer at the beginning, but as time goes on, It's going to speed up your scrolling. It's going to be better for you, and it's going to make you a better scroller. Guys, regardless, this piece is done. We're going to frame it, and who knows what else. We'll see how it goes. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm sorry it went on for 2 parts, but that's just the way it happened with that initial mess up with the different materials. Some projects are like that, but at least we got the final product, and I think it looks great. I love this cutting. I've been wanting to do it for a while. As I said in part 1, guys, I will post the link below to the back issue of the magazine that this came from. I will not provide this pattern to anybody. Please don't ask me. I do not have distribution rights. There is enough controversy about this pattern going around as it is that I'm not getting in the middle of giving it out when I don't have distribution rights or the legal ability to do so. So please don't ask me for this pattern. I'm not going to give it out. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, guys. If you haven't already, if you found any part of today's show interesting, informative, likable, why not like and subscribe to the channel? We have an amazing audience base here, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I hope you've had a little bit of fun with this one. I hope you're going to look into intricate patterns like this and scroll work in itself. I hope you've been able to take something positive away from today's show and got a few tips and tricks to improve your scrolling. But more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.